My brother Kenneth arrived at my house 3 days after Diane's funeral, carrying a leather folder and wearing an expression I'd seen before. The look of someone about to deliver bad news while pretending to be sympathetic. I'd seen it countless times in my 45 years as a surgeon, usually on the faces of people about to tell patients they had terminal diagnoses. "Raymond, we need to talk," Kenneth said, settling into the chair across from me in my study. "About Diane's estate, about her wishes." "Her wishes?" I said calmly, though I knew exactly where this was going. I'd been expecting it for 2 years, ever since Diane had died, ever since the affair between my wife and my brother had finally ended. "Yes, I know this is difficult timing, but there are legal matters that need to be addressed." Kenneth opened the folder and pulled out a document. "Diane made a will. She gave me a copy for safekeeping. Raymond, I'm sorry, but she wanted me to have everything. The house, the investments, the medical practice building, all of it. I took the document from him, my hand steady despite the audacity of what he was attempting. The will was dated 6 months before Diane's death. It appeared to be properly formatted, notarized, signed. It stated clearly that Diane Monroe was leaving her entire estate, valued at approximately $6.2 million, to Kenneth Raymond Morrison, her beloved brother-in-law. "This is quite a surprise," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Diane never mentioned changing her will. She wanted it to be private. She knew you'd be hurt, but Raymond, she and I had a special bond. She trusted me. She wanted to make sure I was taken care of, a special bond. That was one way to describe a 5-year affair." But Kenneth didn't know I knew about the affair. He thought I'd been oblivious, the stereotypical workaholic surgeon who was too busy with patients to notice his wife was sleeping with his own brother. "I'll need to have my attorney review this," I said, setting the document on my desk. "Of course. I understand this is shocking, but Raymond, I hope we can handle this civilly. We're family. Diane would want us to remain close despite this situation." Kenneth left shortly after, probably feeling confident that his plan was working. After all, he'd produced what appeared to be a legitimate will. He had no reason to think I'd fight it. He assumed I was too grief-stricken, too honorable, too devastated by Diane's death to contest her final wishes. He was wrong on all counts. "My name is Raymond Morrison. I'm 71 years old. I spent 45 years as a cardiothoracic surgeon, one of the best in the region. I performed over 8,000 surgeries. I saved thousands of lives, and I learned, very early in my career, that documentation was everything. Every symptom recorded, every decision justified, every outcome tracked. Documentation protected you from lawsuits, from errors, from false accusations. That habit of meticulous documentation had extended beyond my medical practice, into my personal life, into my marriage. And 5 years ago, when I discovered my wife was having an affair with my younger brother, I documented every piece of evidence with surgical precision. I'd known about the affair almost from the beginning. Small things first. Diane mentioning Kenneth had helped her with some household project when I'd been at the hospital. Kenneth calling at odd hours and Diane taking the phone into another room. Perfume I didn't recognize on shirts I found in the laundry. Receipts from restaurants we hadn't gone to together. Any one of those things could have been innocent. Together, they formed a pattern. And patterns were something I'd been trained to recognize. In cardiac rhythms, in disease progressions, in human behavior. I'd confirmed my suspicions 6 months after the affair started. I'd come home early from the hospital one afternoon, my surgery schedule cleared due to an equipment malfunction. I'd walked into my own house and heard sounds from the bedroom. My bedroom. Diane and Kenneth together. I'd left before they saw me. I'd driven to my office and sat in the dark, deciding what to do. I could have confronted them immediately, thrown Kenneth out, divorced Diane. That would have been the expected response, the normal human reaction. But I wasn't normal. I was a surgeon who'd spent 4 decades making calculated decisions in high-pressure situations. I didn't act on emotion. I acted on evidence and strategy. I'd decided to document everything, to gather proof, to understand the full scope of what they were doing. Because something told me this affair wasn't just about sex. It was about something else, something that involved my estate, my assets, my wealth that I'd accumulated over 45 years of surgical practice, Kenneth had always been the failure in our family. 4 years younger than me, he'd tried multiple businesses over the decades. All had failed. He'd declared bankruptcy twice. He'd borrowed money from me repeatedly, always with promises to repay that never materialized. He was 67 now, with no savings, no assets, living in a rented apartment. Diane had come from a wealthy family. She'd been disinherited years ago after a falling out with her parents. She'd been working as a hospital administrator when we'd met 38 years ago. We'd married quickly, built what I thought was a good life together. We'd never had children. That had been Diane's choice, a choice I'd accepted despite wanting a family. She'd said children would interfere with our careers, our freedom, our lifestyle. I'd believed her reasoning. Now, looking back, I wondered if she'd simply never wanted to be that tied to me. After discovering the affair, I'd installed small cameras in my house, legal in our state as long as it was my own property. I'd captured hundreds of hours of footage of Diane and Kenneth together, not just sex, but conversations, planning conversations, discussions about my death. "He's 71, I'd heard Kenneth say one evening when they'd thought I was at a medical conference. How much longer can he realistically practice? And when he retires, when he dies, everything goes to you. We just need to be patient." "I know," Diane had replied, "but Raymond is healthy. He could live another 20 years. I don't want to wait that long, Kenneth. I want a life with you now." "So what are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting we plan ahead. Make sure everything is positioned correctly. When Raymond eventually dies, whether that's next year or in 20 years, we need to ensure I inherit everything. Then, we can finally be together openly." I'd listened to this conversation from my office, reviewing the recorded footage, my hands completely steady. No tremor of rage or hurt or betrayal, just calm analysis of a problem that needed to be solved. They'd been planning to wait for my death, to inherit my estate through Diane, then be together openly once I was gone. It was calculated, cold, patient, the kind of long-term conspiracy that took real dedication. I'd continued documenting for 5 years, every meeting, every conversation, every time Kenneth came to my house while I was supposedly at work, every expensive gift I'd bought Diane that I suspected went to Kenneth instead, every joint account statement showing money being slowly transferred to accounts I couldn't easily track. Then, 2 years ago, Diane had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. Stage 4, terminal. She'd had perhaps 6 months to live. I'd taken care of her during those final months. I was a surgeon after all. I understood treatment options, pain management, end-of-life care. I'd put aside my knowledge of the affair and been a devoted husband, because that's what 45 years of medical practice had taught me. You don't let personal feelings interfere with your duty. Kenneth had visited frequently during those months, playing the caring brother-in-law, holding Diane's hand, crying at her bedside. I'd watched their performances, saying nothing, documenting everything. Diane had died 8 weeks after diagnosis, faster than expected, but pancreatic cancer was unpredictable. I'd handled her funeral with the same precision I'd handled everything else. Proper ceremony, appropriate displays of grief, respectful burial, and then I'd waited to see what Kenneth would do. Because I knew, based on 5 years of documented conversations, that he'd make a move. He'd try to claim the estate somehow. He'd have a plan. The forged will was that plan. I'd suspected he might try something like this. During Diane's final weeks, I'd noticed him spending time alone with her when I'd been out of the room. I'd wondered if he was convincing her to actually change her will, or if he was planning something more audacious. Now I had my answer. He'd forged a will. He'd created a document claiming Diane had left everything to him, and he'd bet that I wouldn't contest it, wouldn't fight, wouldn't challenge my dead wife's apparent final wishes. The next morning, I called my attorney, Patricia Edwards. She was 62, sharp as a scalpel, with 35 years of experience in estate law. I'd worked with her for decades on my own estate planning. "Patricia, my brother has presented a will claiming my deceased wife left everything to him. I need you to examine it for authenticity." "Raymond, when did Diane create this will?" "According to the document, 6 months before her death. But Patricia, I have the original will, the one Diane and I executed together 15 years ago. That will leaves everything to me." This new will Kenneth's presenting is either a forgery or it's a coerced document created when Diane was heavily medicated and not competent. Send me both documents. I'll have them analyzed. If Kenneth's will is forged, that's a felony. Document fraud, attempted theft, he could face criminal charges. I'm counting on it. I also made another call to a forensic document examiner named Dr. Helena Martinez. She'd testified in several cases I'd been involved with, analyzing medical records for authenticity. Now, I needed her to analyze Diane's alleged will. Dr. Martinez, I need a comprehensive analysis, ink dating, signature comparison, paper analysis, notary verification, everything. That level of analysis takes time, 2 weeks minimum. Take whatever time you need. I want absolute certainty. Over the next 2 weeks, I prepared for legal warfare. I gathered my documentation of the affair, 5 years of recordings, photographs, bank statements showing suspicious transfers, emails between Diane and Kenneth that I'd accessed from our shared computer, phone records showing thousands of calls between them. I also created a timeline, a detailed chronology of the affair, cross-referenced with my own whereabouts, with financial transactions, with everything that had happened over 5 years. The timeline was 50 pages long, color-coded, annotated with evidence references. It was the kind of documentation I'd created for complex surgical cases. Except this case wasn't about saving a life. It was about destroying a conspiracy. Patricia called with preliminary results. Raymond, I've reviewed both wills. Your original will is clearly legitimate. Kenneth's will has several red flags. The notary stamp appears to be a forgery. The witness signatures don't match any of the names in Diane's contact list. And most significantly, the will uses legal language that's inconsistent with how Diane typically communicated. So it's a fraud. Almost certainly, but we need Dr. Martinez's full forensic analysis to prove it conclusively in court. Kenneth will hire his own experts. This will be a battle. I'm prepared for battle. I've been preparing for 2 years. Dr. Martinez delivered her report 3 weeks after receiving the documents. I met with her and Patricia in Patricia's office to review the findings. Mr. Morrison, Dr. Martinez began, opening a thick binder, the will presented by your brother is definitively forged. The signature is traced from another document, likely a card or letter your wife signed. The ink is approximately 8 weeks old, not 6 months. The paper is from a batch manufactured after your wife's death. The notary stamp belongs to a notary who retired 4 years ago and whose stamp was reported stolen. In short, every aspect of this document is fraudulent. Can you testify to this in court? Absolutely. I'll provide a comprehensive report documenting every finding. Mr. Morrison, whoever created this document was not sophisticated. This is amateur forgery. It won't stand up to scrutiny. Patricia leaned back in her chair. Raymond, we have enough to destroy Kenneth's claim. We can file a formal objection to probate, submit the forensic analysis, and expose this fraud. But I've known about the affair for 5 years. I documented it extensively. I'm prepared to present that evidence in court if necessary. The affair doesn't justify forgery. If anything, it proves Kenneth's motive. He was sleeping with my wife, waiting for my death. Then when she died first, he panicked and forged a will to steal the estate anyway. Patricia nodded slowly. This is going to be ugly, Raymond. Family trials always are. And when you add affair accusations and forgery charges, it becomes a public spectacle. I spent 45 years in operating rooms making life and death decisions. I can handle a courtroom. We filed our objection to probate 1 week later. The filing included the forensic analysis, the original valid will, and a request for criminal investigation into Kenneth's actions. We also filed a restraining order preventing Kenneth from accessing any of the estate assets pending resolution. Kenneth's attorney, a man named Douglas Hammond, responded with outrage. He filed motions claiming I was contesting Diane's wishes out of greed. He accused me of trying to deny my brother the inheritance his sister-in-law had wanted him to have. He painted Kenneth as the victim of a wealthy, heartless surgeon who couldn't accept his wife's final decisions. The probate hearing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the meantime, Kenneth tried to contact me repeatedly. Phone calls I didn't answer, emails I ignored. Finally, he showed up at my house uninvited. Raymond, we need to talk about this reasonably, Kenneth said when I opened the door. Fighting over Diane's will isn't what she would have wanted. We're brothers. We should be able to work this out. You forged a will, Kenneth. You committed fraud. There's nothing to work out. I didn't forge anything. Diane made that will. She wanted me to have the estate. I'm just honoring her wishes. Diane didn't make that will. She died before that will was allegedly created. The forensic analysis proves it. The ink dates to 8 weeks ago. Diane died 2 years ago. You forged her signature, you faked a notary stamp, and you invented witnesses. And Kenneth, you're going to prison for it. Kenneth's face went pale. You can't prove that. I have a forensic document examiner's report that proves every word of it. I have evidence that will stand up in any court. You made a mistake, Kenneth. You thought I was too grief-stricken or too honorable to challenge you. You were wrong. This is about the affair, isn't it? You found out somehow. You know about me and Diane, and you're punishing me for it. I've known about the affair for 5 years, Kenneth. I documented every conversation, every meeting, every lie. I have recordings of you and Diane planning to wait for my death so you could inherit my estate through her. I have evidence of you manipulating her, using her, conspiring with her. The affair isn't why I'm destroying you. The forgery is, but the affair proves your motive. Kenneth's shock was genuine. He'd thought I'd been oblivious. The revelation that I'd known all along, that I'd been documenting everything, clearly hadn't occurred to him. Raymond, please. I made mistakes, but I'm your brother. Doesn't that count for something? You stopped being my brother when you started sleeping with my wife. You became something else, a conspirator, a fraud, a thief, and now you're going to face the consequences of those choices. I'll lose everything. If I'm convicted of forgery, I'll go to prison. I'll have a criminal record. My life will be over. Your life has been a series of failures, Kenneth. This is just the final one. The difference is, this time, you're not borrowing money from me to recover. You're going to prison. Kenneth left without another word. I watched him drive away, his car as old and beat up as his prospects. Then I went inside and continued preparing for the hearing. The evidence was organized in binders. The timeline was refined and updated. The forensic reports were ready for presentation. And I had one more piece of evidence I'd been holding back. A recording from 3 weeks before Diane's death. Diane and Kenneth in my bedroom, thinking I was at the hospital. Diane weak from chemo but lucid. Kenneth, I'm dying, Diane had said on the recording. And when I die, you get nothing. Everything goes to Raymond under our original will. I'm sorry. Can't you change it? Make a new will? I'm too weak. I can barely sign my name. No attorney would accept a will I signed now. They'd say I wasn't competent. Kenneth, I tried, but it's too late. That conversation proved Kenneth had known Diane hadn't left him anything in a legitimate will. It proved he'd understood there was no legal way for him to inherit, which meant the will he'd presented to me had to be a forgery. He'd known it was his only option. The hearing would expose everything. The affair, the conspiracy, the forgery. Kenneth would be destroyed completely, criminally, financially, socially. And I felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, just the same clinical detachment I'd felt in operating rooms for 45 years. Kenneth had made choices. Now he'd face the consequences of those choices. That was how the world worked. In 6 weeks, the trial would begin. And I was going to win. So far, James Crawford discovered his son-in-law Marcus had systematically pushed him out of the business he'd funded with $180,000. After Emily chose her husband over her father, Marcus physically shoved James out of their house, calling him dead weight. Now, with his shoulder still aching from the assault, James has finally called his lawyer. What Marcus doesn't know is about to destroy everything he's built. Robert Davidson's office was on the 8th floor of a downtown building I'd helped design 12 years ago. I'd recommended Robert to 3 colleagues over the years, but I'd never needed his services myself. Until now. James, Robert said, rising from behind his mahogany desk as his secretary showed me in. He was in his mid-50s, silver-haired with sharp eyes that missed nothing. It's been too long, though I wish you were here under better circumstances. I sank into the leather chair across from him, my shoulder still throbbing from where I'd hit the doorframe. Robert noticed me wince. Are you injured? he asked immediately, his attorney instincts kicking in. My son-in-law shoved me yesterday, I said flatly. Hard enough to leave bruises. Robert's expression darkened. He pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Tell me everything. Start from the beginning. So I did. I told him about the $180,000, about the 3 years of unpaid consulting work, about the partnership papers Marcus's lawyer had drawn up, about Emily's pregnancy and Marcus's systematic isolation campaign, about being called external family and told to stay away, about the shove, the bruises, the door slamming in my face. When I finished, Robert was quiet for a long moment, studying his notes. Do you have a copy of the partnership agreement? He finally asked. At home, I said. In my safe. I haven't looked at it in 2 years. Marcus said I was just an investor. Marcus said a lot of things, Robert replied, his tone dry. Most of them, I suspect, are legally meaningless. Let's find out what the actual agreement says. Can you bring it in today? I drove home, retrieved the document from my safe, a thick folder I'd barely glanced at after signing, and returned to Robert's office within an hour. He put on his reading glasses and began working through the pages, occasionally making notes, his expression growing increasingly focused. After 20 minutes, he looked up at me with something resembling satisfaction. James, he said slowly, do you remember what this document says about ownership structure? Marcus told me it was a standard investor agreement, I said. I put in the capital, he runs the operations, we split profits based on investment percentage. Did you read it before signing? I felt my face heat with embarrassment. No. Marcus said his lawyer had drafted something fair, and I trusted him. He was marrying my daughter. I thought we were family. Robert nodded, not with judgment, but with understanding. Family trust is how most of these situations start. Let me read you Section 3, subsection B. He cleared his throat and began reading from the document. In consideration of the capital investment of $180,000 provided by James Crawford, hereinafter referred to as senior partner, the ownership structure of M&E Mechanical Solutions LLC shall be allocated as follows. James Crawford, 51%, Marcus Wellington, 49%. The senior partner shall maintain majority ownership and final approval authority over all major business decisions, including but not limited to contracts exceeding $50,000, hiring or termination of management-level employees, changes to business structure, sale of company assets, and dissolution of the partnership. The words hit me like a physical blow. 51%, majority ownership, final approval authority. I'm the majority owner? I said, my voice barely a whisper. You're not just the majority owner, Robert said, setting down the document. You're the controlling partner. According to this agreement, Marcus can't make any major business decision without your written approval. Every contract over $50,000 needs your signature. Every management hire needs your consent. If he's been operating the company without you for the past 3 years, he's been doing it in direct violation of this agreement. My mind was reeling. But he has been. He's signed contracts, hired people, made major decisions, all without consulting me. Then he's in breach of contract, Robert said simply. Multiple breaches by the sound of it. Let me ask you this. Have you been receiving the financial reports specified in the agreement? Section 5 states you're entitled to monthly detailed financial statements. He sends me quarterly summaries, I said. Just revenue and profit numbers, nothing detailed. Robert made another note. Another breach. Section 7 states that as senior partner, you're entitled to access all company financial records at any time. Have you been denied access? I thought about Carla telling me I needed to make appointments, about Marcus refusing to let me into the office, about the text message dismissing me from active consulting. Yes, I said repeatedly over the past 6 months. Excellent, Robert said, and at my shocked expression he clarified. Excellent for building a case. James, your son-in-law has been operating under the false assumption that you're a passive investor with no real control. In reality, you're the majority owner of his company. You have the legal right to make executive decisions, to access all records, to approve or reject any major contract or hire. So what does that mean? I asked, though I was beginning to understand. Robert leaned forward, his expression serious. It means you have options, several options. We could send Marcus a formal letter reminding him of the partnership terms and demanding compliance. We could file for breach of contract and seek damages. We could demand a buyout of his minority share, or, he paused significantly, you could exercise your majority ownership rights and take full operational control of the company. The room felt suddenly airless. Take control of the company, Marcus's company. The business he'd built on my money, my expertise, my connections, while systematically pushing me out. If I take control, I said slowly, what happens to Marcus? Whatever you decide happens to Marcus, Robert replied. As majority owner, you have the authority to remove him from management, restructure his role, reduce his salary, or terminate his employment entirely. You could run the company yourself, hire someone else to run it, or dissolve it. It's your company, James. Legally, it always has been. I drove home in a daze, Robert's words echoing in my mind. Your company. It always has been. For 3 years, I'd believed I was the junior partner, the grateful investor, the helpful father-in-law who should stay in his lane. Marcus had cultivated that belief, reinforced it, weaponized it. He'd made me feel like a burden, an obstacle, a relic who didn't understand how things work now. But the papers didn't lie. I wasn't the junior partner. I was the boss. I had always been the boss. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind spinning with possibilities and questions. Emily was still my daughter. Did I really want to destroy her husband's business, the source of income for my grandchild? Did I want to be the vindictive father who couldn't let go? But then I remembered Marcus's hand on my chest, shoving me backward. I remembered the pain in my shoulder, the humiliation of stumbling on my own daughter's porch. I remembered the word burden, number. This wasn't about vindictiveness. This was about justice, about standing up for myself, about showing these people that age doesn't equal weakness and kindness doesn't equal stupidity. I called Robert the next morning. I want to move forward, I said, but I need more information first. I need to know exactly what Marcus has been doing with my company. Our company, Robert corrected gently, and I agree. Before we make any major moves, we need a complete picture. I'm going to refer you to someone who can help with that. 2 days later, I met Daniel Chen in a coffee shop downtown. He was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with an easy smile and casual clothes that made him look like a tech startup founder rather than a private investigator. Mr. Crawford, he said, shaking my hand. Robert filled me in on the basics. Sounds like your son-in-law has been playing fast and loose with your business. I need to know what he's really been doing, I said. The financial records he's been sending me are bare bones. I don't know what contracts he's signed, what debts he's incurred, how he's actually spending the money. Daniel pulled out a tablet. Let's start with what you do know. Company name, location, Marcus's full name, any employee names you remember. I gave him everything I could remember. Daniel made notes, asked clarifying questions, and then explained his process. I'll start with public records, business filings, tax liens, any legal actions involving the company. Then I'll do some social engineering, see what I can learn from current and former employees. People love to talk about their bosses, especially when they feel undervalued or mistreated. Give me a week, and I'll have a preliminary report for you. A week felt like an eternity. I spent the time organizing my own records, printing out every email, every financial summary Marcus had sent me, every text message. I created a timeline of our partnership, noting every time he'd dismissed me, every time he'd made decisions without consulting me, every breach of our agreement. I also went to my doctor about my shoulder. The bruising had deepened to an ugly purple black. Dr. Morrison took photographs and documented everything in my medical records. James, he said seriously, this is assault. Have you considered filing a police report? Not yet, I said, but I'm documenting everything. Good, Dr. Morrison replied, because whoever did this, they crossed a line. When Daniel called me back 9 days later, his voice was grim. Mr. Crawford, we need to meet, in person. I found some things you need to see. We met at Robert's office this time. Daniel spread out documents across the conference table: bank statements, contract copies, employee records, photographs. "Okay," Daniel began, "let me walk you through what I found. First, the good news. The company is financially stable. Revenue for the last fiscal year was $947,000, up from $700,000 the year before. Current assets exceed liabilities by about $280,000. "That's good," I said, though I sensed a "but" coming. "But," Daniel continued, "there are some concerning patterns. First, Marcus has been paying himself a salary of $95,000 annually, plus bonuses totaling another $30,000 last year. That's $125,000 in compensation. For a company grossing $900,000, that seems high, but not unreasonable," Robert noted. "Agreed," Daniel said. "Except Marcus has been telling the IRS something different. According to the tax returns, which you should have been receiving copies of as a partner, by the way, he reported his salary as $65,000. The additional $60,000, classified as consulting fees, paid to a company called Wellington Advisory, LLC. "Let me guess," I said, my jaw tightening. "Wellington Advisory is owned by Marcus." "His wife, actually," Daniel said, "Emily Wellington. Established 3 months after your daughter got pregnant. Marcus has been funneling money through this shell company, probably to reduce tax liability and hide the true amount he's paying himself." I felt sick. Emily was complicit in this. My daughter had helped Marcus deceive me. "There's more," Daniel continued, pulling out another document. 4 months ago, Marcus took out a business line of credit for $150,000, using the company assets as collateral. According to the terms of your partnership agreement, any debt over $50,000 requires your written approval. "I never approved that," I said. "I know. He forged your signature." Daniel pulled out a loan document and pointed to the signature line. "James Crawford." But look closely at the handwriting. Different slant, different pressure. A handwriting analyst could confirm it, but I'd bet money this isn't your signature. "That's fraud," Robert said flatly. "Felony fraud." "It gets worse," Daniel said. "I talked to 3 former employees who left the company in the past year. According to them, Marcus has been increasingly erratic, explosive temper, unreasonable demands, taking credit for other people's work. 2 of them mentioned that he talks about you, about how he had to get rid of the dead weight, and how the company is finally his." Dead weight, that phrase again. "One more thing," Daniel said, his expression darkening. "This is the part that worried me most. 2 months ago, Marcus increased the company's life insurance policy on key employees. Standard practice for a growing business, except he listed you as a key employee and took out a $500,000 policy on your life with the company as the beneficiary." The room went silent. I stared at Daniel, not comprehending. "A life insurance policy? On me? But I don't even work there anymore." "Exactly," Daniel said, "which makes it suspicious. You're not active in the company, you're not providing services, yet Marcus insures your life for $500,000. If something were to happen to you, the company, which he believes he controls, gets a massive payout." "Jesus Christ," Robert breathed. "Combined with the physical assault, this looks like—" "Planning," I finished, my blood running cold. "He's planning something?" My mind flashed to Marcus shoving me, to the calculation in his eyes. I remembered the door frame, how hard I'd hit it. What if I'd fallen differently? What if I'd hit my head? At 67, a fall like that could be fatal. "We need to move fast," Robert said decisively. "Daniel, compile everything into a formal report. James, we're filing for an emergency injunction first thing Monday morning. We're freezing all company accounts, demanding a full audit, and removing Marcus from any signatory authority until this is resolved." "What about Emily?" I asked, my voice hollow. "She's involved in the shell company." Robert's expression softened. "We'll deal with that as it comes. But James, you need to accept that your daughter may have been complicit in this fraud. Either she knew what Marcus was doing and helped him, or she's been manipulated just like you were. Either way, she's going to have to answer some hard questions. That weekend was the longest of my life. I stayed home, doors locked, security system armed. Every time a car drove past, I tensed. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I was a 67-year-old man, alone in my house, waiting for Monday morning and wondering if my own son-in-law might actually be dangerous enough to do something desperate. On Sunday evening, my phone rang. Emily. I stared at the screen, my finger hovering over the answer button. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let it go to voicemail, to avoid the pain of hearing her voice. But she was still my daughter. She was still carrying my grandchild. "Hello, Emily," I said, my voice carefully neutral. "Daddy," she said, and she was crying. "Daddy, please. We need to talk." "I'm listening." "Marcus told me what happened, about the fight, about him pushing you. Daddy, I'm so sorry. He was stressed. He didn't mean." "Yes, he did," I interrupted calmly. "He meant every word and every action. He called me dead weight, Emily. He threw me out of your house. My shoulder is still bruised." She made a small sobbing sound. I know, and I'm so sorry. But Daddy, you have to understand. He's under so much pressure with the business and the baby coming. He snapped. It won't happen again." "You're right," I said. "It won't, because I won't be around for it to happen again." "What does that mean?" Her voice sharpened with fear. "Daddy, what are you planning?" "I'm planning to protect myself, Emily. Something I should have done a long time ago." Are you going to sue him?" "Daddy, please, we can't afford that right now. The business is everything. If you destroy the business, you destroy our family's future. You destroy your grandchild's future." The manipulation was so blatant it almost made me laugh. After everything they'd done, they were still trying to use my love for her against me. "The business isn't yours to lose," I said quietly. "It's mine. It always has been, and it's time Marcus learned that." "Huh? What are you talking about?" Emily said, her voice rising. "Marcus owns the company. You just invested money. Read the partnership agreement, Emily. Really read it. Section 3, subsection B. Then call me back if you still think I'm just an investor." I hung up before she could respond. My hands were shaking, but not from fear this time. From anger, from the absolute clarity of knowing that I was done being anyone's ATM, anyone's burden, anyone's fool. Monday morning, Robert and I walked into the courthouse together. By noon, we had our emergency injunction. All M&E Mechanical Solutions bank accounts were frozen, pending a full audit. Marcus was temporarily barred from making any financial decisions or signing any contracts without my written approval. The court had appointed an independent accountant to review all company records for the past 3 years. By 2 p.m., the sheriff had served Marcus with the court order at the company office. By 3 p.m., my phone was ringing nonstop. Marcus, Emily. Unknown numbers that I suspected were Marcus calling from different phones. I ignored all of them. At 4 p.m., Robert called. He's lawyered up. His attorney just called me, making threats about filing countersuits for harassment and abuse of process. "Let him try," I said calmly. "The documents don't lie." "No," Robert agreed. "They don't. I've also filed for a restraining order based on the assault. Hearing is scheduled for Friday. Make sure you bring those medical photographs." That night, I received a text from an unknown number. "You're destroying your daughter's life." Her baby's life. What kind of father does that? I didn't respond, but I took a screenshot and forwarded it to Robert. Evidence. Everything was evidence now. Wednesday, the court-appointed accountant, a stern woman named Margaret Price, arrived at my house with preliminary findings. "Mr. Crawford," she said, opening her laptop, "I've spent 2 days reviewing the company records. What I've found is extensive financial mismanagement at best and deliberate fraud at worst." She walked me through it. The forged signature on the loan documents, the shell company transferring money to Emily, unreported cash payments to Marcus totaling over $80,000 across 3 years, fake vendor invoices that appeared to be kickback schemes, and equipment purchases that couldn't be accounted for in the company inventory. "The good news," Margaret said, "is that the company is still solvent. The bad news is that Marcus Wellington has essentially stolen an estimated $120,000 from the company through various schemes over the past 3 years. $120,000. My money. Money I'd invested in good faith, believing I was helping family." "What happens now?" I asked. "The full audit will take another 2 weeks," Margaret said. But I have enough already to recommend criminal charges for fraud and embezzlement. This goes beyond civil matters, Mr. Crawford. This is theft. Friday morning, I stood in front of a judge at the restraining order hearing. Marcus sat across the courtroom with his attorney, his face red with barely contained rage. Emily wasn't there. Robert had advised me that as a pregnant woman, she couldn't be compelled to attend. The hearing was brief. I presented the medical photos of my bruised shoulder, Dr. Morrison's written statement, the text messages Marcus had sent me, the timeline of escalating hostility. Marcus's attorney tried to paint it as a minor disagreement and a momentary loss of control that didn't warrant legal intervention. But the judge, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s, wasn't buying it. "Mr. Wellington," she said, looking directly at Marcus, "you physically assaulted a 67-year-old man. You pushed him hard enough to cause significant bruising. Whether or not you regret it now is irrelevant. The petitioner has every right to feel unsafe. Restraining order granted. You are to maintain a distance of at least 500 feet from Mr. Crawford at all times. No contact, direct or indirect. Violation will result in arrest. Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Marcus said through gritted teeth. As we left the courthouse, Marcus shouted after me from the required distance, "You're going to regret this, old man. That's my company. Mine." I turned back calmly. "Read the documents, Marcus." It never was. That night, I received an email from Emily. No phone call this time. She couldn't risk violating her husband's restraining order by facilitating contact. The email was long, rambling, full of accusations and pleas. I was cruel. I was vindictive. I was destroying her family out of spite. She'd thought I loved her. She'd thought family meant something to me. I read it twice, then saved it to a folder Robert had instructed me to keep for all communication. Then I wrote back a single paragraph. "Emily, I loved you enough to give Marcus $180,000 in 3 years of my life. I loved you enough to accept being pushed aside without fighting back. I loved you enough to stay quiet while he stole from me, lied to me, and assaulted me. But love doesn't mean letting people destroy you. I hope someday you'll understand that. I hope your child grows up knowing their grandfather fought for his dignity, not against their future. But if you and Marcus have truly chosen this path, then I'll respect that choice by making sure he can never hurt me or anyone else again. All my love, always, Dad." I hit send and closed my laptop. The war had begun. And for the first time in 3 years, I wasn't the one on the defensive. So far, Raymond discovered his brother Kenneth forged a will to steal his $6.2 million estate after conducting a 5-year affair with Raymond's deceased wife, Diane. At the probate hearing, forensic expert Dr. Martinez proved every aspect of the will was fraudulent, from the traced signature to the stolen notary stamp to paper manufactured after Diane's death. Raymond's recordings exposed Kenneth's knowledge that no legitimate will existed. Criminal charges were filed for forgery, fraud, and attempted theft. Now, 6 weeks later, the trial begins. The criminal trial was held in the main courthouse, not the smaller conference room where the probate hearing had taken place. This was State of Connecticut versus Kenneth Morrison, criminal charges that could send my brother to prison for decades. I sat in the gallery behind the prosecution table, watching as jury selection began. Patricia Edwards wasn't handling the criminal case. That responsibility fell to Assistant District Attorney Michael Torres, a man in his early 40s with a reputation for winning fraud cases. He'd spent 3 weeks preparing, reviewing every piece of evidence I'd collected, every recording I'd made, every document Dr. Martinez had analyzed. He knew this case better than anyone except me. Kenneth sat at the defense table with Douglas Hammond, wearing a cheap suit that looked purchased specifically for trial. He'd lost weight over the past 6 weeks. His face looked gaunt, hollow. He never looked at me during jury selection, just stared straight ahead like he was somewhere else entirely. Jury selection took 2 days. Torres wanted people who understood documentation, who respected expertise, who wouldn't be swayed by Hammond's attempts to portray Kenneth as a victim of his grieving older brother. Hammond wanted people sympathetic to underdogs, people suspicious of authority, people who might believe complex conspiracies. They settled on 12 jurors and 2 alternates, 7 women, 5 men, ages ranging from 28 to 67. Occupations included a high school teacher, an accountant, a retired postal worker, a nurse, 2 small business owners, and a computer programmer. People who understood responsibility, documentation, consequences. The trial began on a Monday morning in late November. The courthouse was cold despite the heating system running full blast. I wore the same navy suit I'd worn to Diane's funeral, the same burgundy tie. Professional, composed, ready. Torres delivered his opening statement standing directly in front of the jury box, making eye contact with each juror individually as he spoke. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about a man who looked at his older brother's grief and saw an opportunity. Kenneth Morrison watched his brother Raymond suffer through his wife's terminal illness. He watched Raymond care for Diane Morrison through months of chemotherapy and pain. He watched Raymond hold Diane's hand as she died. And then, 3 days after the funeral, Kenneth Morrison walked into his brother's home with a forged will, claiming Diane had left Kenneth everything. The house, the savings, the medical practice building, all $6.2 million, everything Raymond had worked 45 years to build. Torres paused, letting that sink in. The evidence will show that Kenneth Morrison forged Diane's signature on a fraudulent will. He used a notary stamp stolen from a retired notary public. He printed the document on paper, manufactured after Diane's death. He presented this forgery to Raymond knowing it was fake, knowing Diane had left everything to her husband in their legitimate will, knowing he had no legal right to claim anything. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was calculated fraud committed by a man desperate for money, and the evidence will prove it beyond any reasonable doubt. Hammond's opening statement tried a different approach. He stood further back from the jury, hands in his pockets, posture casual and conversational. My client Kenneth Morrison is not a perfect man. He's made mistakes in his life. He's failed at businesses. He's struggled financially. But that doesn't make him a forger. The prosecution wants you to believe Kenneth created an elaborate fraud to steal his brother's estate. But consider this. Why would Kenneth forge a will claiming everything? Why not forge one claiming just part of the estate? Something believable. If you're going to commit fraud, wouldn't you be smarter about it? Hammond gestured toward Kenneth, who sat looking defeated and confused. The truth is simpler than the prosecution suggests. Diane Morrison did make a will leaving assets to Kenneth. Maybe she felt guilty about their relationship. Maybe she wanted to help Kenneth financially. But Raymond Morrison, hurt and angry about the affair he'd discovered, destroyed that will and claimed it never existed. Then he hired expensive experts to call it a forgery. This isn't a criminal case. This is a family dispute that should have stayed in probate court. Kenneth Morrison is not a criminal. He's a man caught in his brother's revenge plot. I sat completely still during Hammond's statement, showing no reaction. Let him spin his theories. The evidence would speak louder than his speculation. Torres called Dr. Helena Martinez as his first witness. She took the stand wearing a professional gray suit, her credentials displayed on a presentation screen behind her. Ph.D. in document analysis, 23 years with the FBI, author of 2 textbooks on forensic document examination, expert testimony in over 200 criminal cases. Dr. Martinez, you examined the will Kenneth Morrison presented claiming Diane Morrison left him her estate. What did you find? I found comprehensive evidence of forgery across multiple dimensions. The signature was traced from another document. The ink was approximately 8 weeks old, not 6 months as the document date suggested. The paper was manufactured after Mrs. Morrison's death. The notary stamp came from a retired notary whose stamps were reported stolen 18 months ago. Every testable element of the document indicated recent fabrication. How certain are you of these conclusions? Absolutely certain. These findings aren't subjective interpretations. They're objective measurements. Chemical analysis, microscopic examination, manufacturing date verification. The document is definitively forged. Hammond's cross-examination tried to suggest uncertainty and bias. Dr. Martinez, isn't it true that ink dating is an imprecise science, that different storage conditions can affect results? Ink dating has margins of error, yes, but in this case, multiple independent tests confirmed the same time frame. Additionally, when combined with the other evidence, the traced signature, the anachronistic paper, the stolen notary stamp, the conclusion is unambiguous. Isn't it possible Raymond Morrison paid you extra to reach these conclusions? Torres objected immediately. Your Honor, counsel is implying witness tampering without any foundation. Sustained. Mr. Hammond, rephrase or move on. Dr. Martinez, have you ever been wrong in a forensic analysis? In 23 years and thousands of cases, I've had 3 analyses challenged successfully. 2 involved extremely sophisticated forgeries created by professional counterfeiters. 1 involved equipment malfunction. This case involves none of those circumstances. This is an amateur forgery poorly executed. Torres called me as his next witness. I took the stand and was sworn in, then settled into the witness chair with the same calm I'd felt in operating rooms for 4.5 decades. Control your breathing, focus on facts, emotion clouds judgment. Dr. Morrison, please tell the jury about your relationship with your brother Kenneth. Kenneth is 7 years younger than me. Growing up, we were close, but as adults, our lives diverged. Kenneth struggled with business ventures that failed. He borrowed money from me repeatedly, amounts he rarely repaid. Over 40 years, I estimate I gave or lent Kenneth approximately $80,000. Did you ever refuse to help him? Never. He was my brother. Family helps family. Tell us about your marriage to Diane Morrison. We were married 38 years, no children. Diane had fertility issues we never resolved. Our marriage was stable, comfortable. We had routines, shared interests, mutual respect. When did you discover Kenneth and Diane were having an affair? 5 years ago. I came home early from the hospital one afternoon and heard them in our bedroom. I didn't confront them. I left quietly and thought about what to do. Why didn't you confront them? Because I'm a surgeon. Surgeons don't react emotionally during crises. We assess, we plan, we document. I decided to document the affair rather than confront it immediately. How did you document it? I installed security cameras in our home, legal cameras in common areas, not bedrooms or bathrooms. These cameras captured Kenneth entering our home multiple times per week when I was supposedly at work. I also kept records of calls, emails, and text messages. I documented approximately 300 separate meetings over 5 years. Did Diane know you were documenting the affair? No, neither did Kenneth. I maintained normal relations with both of them while gathering evidence. Why? Because I wanted the complete truth, not partial truth, not emotional outbursts that could be denied later. Complete, irrefutable documentation. When did Diane die? 2 years ago, pancreatic cancer, diagnosed stage 4. She lived 8 weeks after diagnosis. Did she make any statements about her state before dying? Yes. 3 weeks before her death, I recorded a conversation between her and Kenneth in our bedroom. They thought I was at the hospital. Diane told Kenneth she was dying and that everything would go to me under our original will. She said she was too weak to make a new will and that no attorney would accept her signature given her condition. Kenneth asked if there was any way he could inherit. Diane said no. Torres played the recording for the jury, Diane's weak voice clearly in pain, telling Kenneth the truth. Kenneth's desperate questions, Diane's apologies, but firm refusals. The recording was devastating because it proved Kenneth had known there was no legitimate will leaving him anything. 3 days after Diane's funeral, Kenneth came to your home. What happened? He presented the forged will claiming Diane had left him everything. He said Diane had wanted this, that they'd had a special bond, that she'd trusted him more than me. He demanded I sign documents transferring the estate to him within 30 days. What did you do? I took the will to Patricia Edwards, an estate attorney I'd worked with previously. She immediately identified irregularities and recommended forensic analysis. That analysis proved the will was forged. Hammond's cross-examination tried to paint me as vindictive and cold. Dr. Morrison, you discovered your wife was having an affair and you didn't confront her? You just installed cameras and recorded them? Correct. That's not normal behavior, is it? It's strategic behavior. Emotional confrontations lead to denials, excuses, and destroyed evidence. Documentation leads to truth. So you let your wife continue cheating on you for 5 years while you gathered evidence? I let both of them believe they were succeeding while I documented their actions. Yes. And you never felt anger, hurt, betrayal? I felt all of those things. But I didn't let those feelings control my actions. That's discipline. Or is it sociopathy? Normal people confront cheating spouses. They don't spy on them for years, Torres objected. Argumentative, and Dr. Morrison's emotional responses aren't on trial here. Sustained. But Hammond had made his point to the jury. I was strange, cold, calculating, not a sympathetic victim. The trial continued for 8 days. Torres presented the forensic evidence, the recordings, the timeline, the paper manufacturing records, the stolen notary stamp documentation. He proved every element of forgery beyond reasonable doubt. Hammond presented character witnesses for Kenneth, neighbors who said he was a good man, former colleagues who remembered him fondly, his landlord who testified Kenneth always paid rent on time. He tried to argue Kenneth wasn't smart enough or skilled enough to forge a will, that someone else must have created it, and Kenneth just believed it was real. But the evidence was overwhelming. Kenneth's fingerprints were on the forged document. His computer's printer had created it, according to forensic analysis of printer characteristics. His internet search history showed queries for how to forge a will, signature tracing, and stolen notary stamps in the weeks before Diane died. During the trial, Kenneth never took the stand. Hammond advised against it, probably knowing Torres would destroy him on cross-examination. Closing arguments happened on a Friday afternoon. Torres summarized the evidence methodically, pointing out that every element proved Kenneth's guilt. Kenneth Morrison forged a will. Kenneth Morrison stole a notary stamp. Kenneth Morrison attempted to defraud his brother of millions of dollars. These are facts, proven by overwhelming evidence. The defense wants you to believe Raymond Morrison orchestrated some elaborate frame job. But why would a successful retired surgeon with a clean record and $7 million in assets commit multiple felonies to frame his brother? What's his motive? Whereas Kenneth Morrison's motive is clear. He was broke, desperate, and saw an opportunity. The evidence proves his guilt. Justice demands a conviction. Hammond's closing argument was more emotional. He portrayed Kenneth as a victim of circumstances, of a cold brother's revenge, of prosecutorial overreach. But he couldn't refute the physical evidence. He couldn't explain away the forged signature, the stolen notary stamp, or Kenneth's internet searches. The jury deliberated for 5 hours. When they returned, the forewoman stood and delivered the verdicts. Guilty on all counts: forgery in the first degree, fraud in the first degree, attempted grand larceny, 3 separate felonies. Kenneth showed no emotion when the verdicts were read. He just sat there staring at the table, like he'd known this was coming all along, like his entire life had been leading to this moment. Sentencing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. Torres filed sentencing memorandums arguing for maximum penalties given the calculated nature of the crimes, the breach of family trust, and Kenneth's lack of remorse. Hammond filed counter-memorandums requesting leniency based on Kenneth's age, his lack of serious prior criminal record, and his supposedly diminished mental capacity. The sentencing hearing was brief. Judge Sullivan reviewed the pre-sentence investigation report, which detailed Kenneth's financial history, his multiple failed businesses, his pattern of borrowing money from family members and not repaying it. Then she looked directly at Kenneth. "Mr. Morrison, you betrayed your brother in the worst possible way. You had an affair with his wife for 5 years. Then, when she died, you attempted to steal his life's work through forgery and fraud. These crimes were premeditated, calculated, and cruel. You showed no remorse until you were caught, and even then, your remorse seems directed at the consequences you face rather than the harm you caused. The court finds no mitigating factors that would justify leniency." She paused, looking at the sentencing guidelines. "For forgery in the first degree, I sentence you to 7 years in state prison. For fraud in the first degree, I sentence you to 5 years to run consecutively. For attempted grand larceny, I sentence you to 3 years to run consecutively. Total sentence, 15 years in Connecticut State Prison. You will be eligible for parole after serving 80% of your sentence, which is 12 years. Bailiff, remand the defendant into custody immediately. 15 years. Kenneth would be 82 years old when he was released, assuming he lived that long. His life, as he'd known it, was over, destroyed by his own greed and stupidity. Kenneth was handcuffed and led away. He looked back at me one final time before leaving the courtroom. I met his gaze steadily, showing nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no emotion at all. Just acknowledgement that justice had been served. After everyone left, I sat alone in the courtroom for several minutes. 15 years. It seemed appropriate. Kenneth had spent 5 years betraying me with Diane, then attempted to steal decades of my work in one fraud. 15 years in prison was mathematical justice. I walked outside into cold November air. The sun was setting early, shadows stretching across the courthouse steps. I felt lighter than I had in years, not happy exactly, but unburdened, like I'd carried something heavy for a very long time and had finally set it down. Patricia Edwards met me at the bottom of the steps. "How do you feel?" "Complete," I said. "The arc is finished." "You're an unusual man, Raymond. Most people in your situation would be celebrating or crying or something. You look like you just finished a routine surgery." Because that's what this was. A procedure. Patient presented with a problem. Problem was diagnosed, treatment plan was executed, outcome was successful. Emotional reactions don't improve surgical results. You're comparing sending your brother to prison to heart surgery? I'm comparing systematic problem solving to systematic problem solving. The domain doesn't matter, the methodology does. Patricia shook her head with something like admiration. "Well, the probate case is closed. The criminal case is closed. Your estate is secure. What now?" "Now I move on. Kenneth made his choices. He'll live with the consequences. And I'll live my life." "Are you going to visit him in prison?" "No, our relationship ended when he forged that will. I have no brother. The next few months were quiet. I settled Diane's estate properly, distributed some assets to charities she'd supported, sold the medical practice building to a group of young doctors starting their own cardiology practice. I kept the house, though I considered selling it. Too many memories of Diane and Kenneth, too many recordings I'd made, too many cameras I'd installed, but eventually I decided to stay. The house was just a structure. The memories couldn't hurt me anymore. I'd processed them, documented them, and closed that chapter. Kenneth wrote me letters from prison. 4 letters over 6 months, each one progressively more desperate. The first letter tried to apologize, claiming he'd been in a dark place and hadn't been thinking clearly. The second letter asked for forgiveness and suggested we could rebuild our relationship. The third letter begged me to help with his appeal, claiming he'd been represented inadequately. The fourth letter was just angry, accusing me of destroying his life out of petty revenge. I read each letter once, then filed them in a folder labeled Kenneth Prison Correspondence. I didn't respond to any of them. There was nothing to say. Kenneth had made his choices. These were the consequences. Life moved on. I volunteered at a free clinic 2 days a week, using my surgical skills to help people who couldn't afford proper medical care. I traveled, places I'd always wanted to visit but had postponed during my marriage. Italy, Greece, Japan. I read extensively, took up photography, learned to cook properly instead of relying on Diane's cooking or takeout. I dated occasionally, though I had no interest in remarriage. At 71, I valued my independence too much to compromise it again. I had dinner with interesting women, attended concerts and museums, enjoyed companionship without commitment. People who knew my story often asked if I was bitter, if I regretted what had happened, if I wished I'd confronted Diane and Kenneth years earlier instead of documenting everything. My answer was always the same: no regrets. I'd made the choices I'd made based on the information I had and the values I held: documentation over confrontation, evidence over emotion, justice over revenge. Those principles had served me well in 45 years of surgery. They served me equally well in dealing with my brother's betrayal. Kenneth had gambled that I wouldn't discover his forgery, or that if I did, I wouldn't have the evidence to prove it. He'd gambled wrong. He'd underestimated the habits of a man who'd spent half a century documenting every surgery, every complication, every decision in meticulous detail. Surgeons don't survive 45 years without learning to document everything, Because in medicine, if it isn't documented, it didn't happen. And if it did happen but you can't prove it, you lose. Kenneth learned that lesson too late. 2 years after Kenneth went to prison, I received a call from the Department of Corrections. Kenneth had suffered a heart attack during recreation time. He'd been transported to the prison hospital, stabilized, and was expected to survive. They called me because I was listed as his next of kin. I thanked them for the information and asked to be updated on his condition, but declined to visit. Kenneth had heart disease. The prison medical system would provide adequate care. My presence wouldn't change his prognosis. He survived the heart attack and was transferred to a medical facility within the prison system for inmates with chronic health conditions. He was 69 years old, serving a 15-year sentence for crimes committed out of greed and desperation. I was 73, living independently, volunteering regularly, and traveling when I wanted. The difference between our outcomes wasn't luck. It was choices. I'd built a career through discipline and skill. Kenneth had destroyed his through shortcuts and fraud. That was the real lesson of this entire situation. Not that betrayal happens. Everyone knows betrayal happens. The lesson was that consequences exist, that documentation matters, that patience and precision defeat impulse and greed. People often ask if I forgave Kenneth. That question misunderstands forgiveness. Forgiveness doesn't mean pretending the harm didn't happen. It means releasing the emotional attachment to the harm. By that definition, I forgave Kenneth immediately. I felt no ongoing anger, no need for revenge beyond legal consequences, no desire to see him suffer beyond the punishment the court imposed. But forgiveness doesn't mean reconciliation. Kenneth destroyed our relationship through his actions. That destruction was permanent. Forgiveness didn't rebuild what he'd broken. It just meant I wasn't going to carry the weight of his choices anymore. What I learned from this experience is that family is defined by actions, not blood. Kenneth was my brother biologically, but he stopped being my brother behaviorally the moment he started sleeping with my wife. Biology doesn't obligate loyalty. Behavior does. The people who supported me through this process, Patricia Edwards, Dr. Martinez, the detectives and prosecutors, they showed more loyalty than Kenneth ever had. They were my family in the ways that mattered. If you're in a situation similar to mine, if you're facing betrayal from family members, if you're questioning whether blood relationships obligate forgiveness, remember this: you owe loyalty to people who show loyalty to you. You owe nothing to people who exploit your trust, regardless of biological connection. Document everything, stay calm, seek professional help when needed, and understand that justice isn't revenge. Justice is simply ensuring that actions have appropriate consequences. Kenneth could have chosen differently at any point. He could have ended the affair. He could have not forged the will. He could have lived his life honestly even if he'd made mistakes. But he chose deception. He chose fraud. He chose to bet everything on a forgery that was doomed to fail because he underestimated his opponent. I'm not special. I'm just a retired surgeon who applied the same principles to personal crisis that I applied to professional challenges. Documentation, precision, patience, discipline. Those principles work in operating rooms. They work in probate court. They work in criminal trials. 3 years after Kenneth went to prison, I turned 74. I was healthy, active, financially secure, and surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. Kenneth was 70, imprisoned in declining health, and facing 9 more years before parole eligibility. The difference between us wasn't intelligence or opportunity. It was integrity. And in the end, integrity always wins. I have no brother named Kenneth anymore. I have a life I built through honest work. I have friendships I earned through trustworthy behavior. I have peace that comes from knowing I acted correctly even when facing betrayal. That's enough. That's everything. And if Kenneth ever reads this somehow, if this story reaches him in prison through some unlikely path, I want him to know, I don't hate you. I don't think about you. You're simply a case I closed, a problem I solved, a chapter I finished. You made your choices. I documented them. The law judge them. Justice was served. That's how it should be. That's how it always was going to be. And that's why, at 74, I sleep perfectly well at night.